I hadn't asked any questions. I didn't want to interrupt. I felt he was taking me on a journey that he needed to make himself. More tears rolled down his cheek at this point, and he made no attempt to wipe them away. I wanted to reach out to him, to hold his hand, or hug his frail old frame, but I didn't. I was rooted to my chair. I couldn't take my eyes off his face. I was transfixed. He continued. Anyway, it carried on like this for weeks, months, into 1938. That was a cold winter. After a few horrible months, things got a little better for us. People just seemed to leave us alone then. They had their own problems. People were not well off. Germany was still suffering the effects of the Depression, and their victimization of the Jews was almost put on hold while they looked after their own families first. The image of Adolf Hitler and the imagery of his Nazi party was becoming more prominent around the country and noticeable in Hanover. You couldn't escape it. As the weather got warmer in springtime, so did the animosity towards the Jews and other minority groups. The gypsy population were on his radar as well. They suffered terribly. Random beatings, public humiliations. These people were ostracized. It was around this time I saw my first dead body, and it wouldn't be my last. A young man was attacked by a group of soldiers, simply for not being able to produce ID when asked. He was Jewish. The star on his arm gave it away. He was beaten so badly that his face was unrecognizable when they had finished with him. They left him where he fell and just walked away. As children, we watched from a distance, stunned and helpless. We stared at his lifeless body for ages until a group of Jewish men came to pick him up, carry the body away. If they hadn't, I'm not sure anybody else would have. No one was prepared to help a Jew, alive or dead. And we got used to living that way. By autumn, my father had lost his job too. We were living on handouts from others. My parents sold what they could raise funds. They sold what they could to raise funds to buy food. We moved from our home into a much smaller flat near the city centre where other Jewish families had gathered. The only community we felt part of now was the Jewish community, and we didn't have much in common with our neighbours, but we tolerated each other because we needed to. In November, the infamous Kristallnacht showed us just how hated we'd become in German society. It was a national display of hatred, and mobs roamed the streets looking for Jews to kill or maim. It was terrifying. We hid inside hoping and praying we wouldn't be discovered. I remember holding my father so tightly. He was my protection, and yet I sensed his own fear. What could he have done if they'd come in? He was only one man. Still, I felt so close to him that night. I had a lot to learn about the world and what was happening around me, but I knew I was loved, and I knew how much family meant in that one moment of absolute terror. We survived that night, but the aftermath was an escalation of a vendetta against the Jews and any others considered enemy of the state. Laws were tightened or introduced to make life even harder for us. Passports were taken or amended to make emigration almost impossible. My father wanted to take us to the Netherlands, but we had neither the funds nor the contacts to make that a viable option. We heard stories of ghettos or hubs for Jews. People spoke of Jews being evicted from their homes and contained in certain zones until the government decided what to do with them, to do with us. We heard talk of getting rid of the Jews, of prisons or places we would be sent. We even heard stories of purifying cities to make them German again. We lived day to day. We existed rather than lived, and yet we stayed together as a unit. The four of us were strong together. We rarely argued or fell out. We all knew how much we needed each other. By the end of 1938, we knew something was in the offing. We were not allowed to buy newspapers, but we could read the headlines, and from that we could deduce conflict was not far away. Hitler had planned to expand the German Empire. Lots of talk of revenge and retribution following the First World War. The French were damned in particular. Hitler spoke of past glories and the need to ensure the eagle flies high again. He singled the French out as enemies of the regime. The Russians too, and the British would follow. We were not aware that Hitler was planning to invade, but we did sense we were not going to escape his eye. Over the next 2 years we survived. We learned to survive. We lived to live day by day. Some days we would eat, some days we wouldn't. But we stayed strong as a family, as strong as we could. There wasn't a norm anymore. Each day was a challenge. Occasionally we'd be brave and walk around without our star on, to feel free again. Even if it was just for a short period, it seemed worth the risk. We walked as a family through the park, along the river, or even in the plazas in the centre. We were never recognised or exposed as Jews, but it was daring and dangerous, and on those occasions, though, we felt alive again. On the 1st of September 1939, the army invaded Poland, and we knew we were at war. Could things get any worse for us? We pondered. Well, yes, they could. A lot worse. Hitler seemed to have two driving forces: clean up at home and clean up abroad. He stopped again at this point. He apologised, and I stressed he had nothing to apologise for. We go at his pace. He thanked me. This was so hard for him, but he carried on despite the grief he was feeling. More tears fell. Some of mine too, I'm not ashamed to say. Sometime in early 1940, our family unit was lost. They came to get us that night. I cannot remember too much about it now. A knock at the door. My sister answered it. She thought it was one of the neighbours, possibly bringing food. She had no reason to be cautious. 4 men in uniform burst through the door. They were waving guns and shouting at us to stand against the wall with our hands in the air. They struck my father with the butt of a gun, but he didn't fall. I remember he didn't fall. He stood beside us, trying to protect us, even against all the odds. I remember them laughing at us, mocking us. They made my mother and sister undress, for no other reason than for their own sick gratification. Then one of them pointed the gun at my sister. He told my father that she would be shot unless he followed their instructions. I remember my father shaking with anger and fear. They told him to follow the soldier at the door and to take me with him. We were to go outside and board the truck. My father asked what would happen to my mother and sister. The soldier laughed and told him not to worry. He said they would be fine if he followed the instructions. My father looked at them and told them both to be strong, to be brave. It was all he could do. He told them he loved them with all his heart. They repeated his words. I didn't say anything. I was too scared. I wanted to. I really wanted to. I wished I had. I've regretted it every day of my life. I wish I'd told my mother and my sister just how much I love them. I do. I still do. I looked at my mother and sister one last time before I was pushed out of the door along with my father. Our family had been torn apart in the matter of minutes. My father and I were pushed and shoved and herded onto a truck filled with other men, other Jews. He held my hand tightly. He wasn't going to lose me as well. But when I looked at him, he was crying. He didn't try to hide it. I needed him to be strong for me, but he was a broken man. He would never be the same again. To this day, I do not know what happened to my mother and sister. I've tried to trace their movements, but with no luck. Part of me doesn't want to know. I cannot bear the thought of their suffering. There was talk of Auschwitz, of the gas chambers. I will never know now. I can only hope and pray that they found a way out. I hope the soldiers let them go. I hope they showed them some kind of human compassion. I have to hope.